Hello, Kim Dodsworth here with the Queensland Storyteller. Today, a change of pace. A good old-fashioned detective story where the murderer makes a mistake, don't they always, and the policeman, by sheer luck only, picks it up. It was always policemen in the 30s, no policewomen, no forensics to speak of, no CCTV, often just luck. The story was chosen by none other than the great Dorothy Sayers, and it's from a collection selected by her, Great Short Stories of Detection, Mystery and Horror, published by Victor Galanx in July 1935. The story is called The Ace of Trouble, and it was written by C.Hedley Barker. It must have been unbearable for Herbert Dawlish to reflect that had the waitress not been slack, he would never have committed murder. Dawlish had just 10 minutes to spare, and he was feeling infernally hungry, so he dropped into an ABC and called for a cup of tea and a bath bun. The waitress dawdled, and Herbert Dawlish fidgeted impatiently. He must have taken out his watch at least 10 times in 5 minutes. When at last his tea and bath bun arrived, he had 2 minutes in which to bolt it down and catch the train for Herne Bay. He rushed onto the platform just as the train was pulling out. His lips tightened with annoyance as he realised that he couldn't possibly reach the saloon. This meant that he would miss the coasters and his game of cards. The train gathered speed. Dawlish gripped his bag and ran, realising that he would be lucky now to catch it at all. However, he managed with a flying leap to land amid the yells of railway officials on the footboard of the rear coach. He clung there for a moment panting, then opened the door and subsided with a gasp on the seat. The man opposite regarded Herbert Dawlish with interest. He was a fleshy sort of person with a gold horseshoe in his tie and aggressively square shoes. He said the usual things that people do say on these occasions: narrow shave, not so easy to run at Dawlish's time of life, and so forth. He also launched into a protracted and lurid reminiscence which had to do with one Sam Biggs, who, being denied the luck which had attended Mr. Dawlish, fell between the footboard and the platform. "Horrible sight. I never want to see another like it." Herbert Dawlish, far as distant Jupiter in that moment from murderous intent, gazed upon the man he was going to murder. He never suffered fools gladly, and this fellow seemed a particularly priceless specimen. However, when the man suggested a game of cards, Dawlish brightened considerably. He had a passion for cards, and he fell in eagerly with a proposal. "I have a pack here," he said, diving into his pocket. There his fingers came in contact with something hard, and he pulled it out with an embarrassed smile. He said, jocularly, laying an automatic pistol on the table, "Don't be alarmed, I'm no gunman. I bought this in town today. You see, I belong to the Herne Bay Rifle Club, and they've just started a revolver class. Fascinating sport." The other nodded. "May I?" he said, and picking up the weapon examined it with the eye of an expert. "Dandy little gun," was his comment. "Loaded too, by gosh." Yes, I brought some cartridges along. It's quite safe. The catch is on. Now what shall we play? Do you happen to know Soixante-six? It's an ideal game for two. Soix. In other words, 66. It's a kind of... Right, governor, I got you. 66. Years. Used to play it over the other side. I remember at Vimy Ridge. Card, will you? Herbert Dawlish dealt. "What about stakes?" he murmured with a swift, appraising glance at the other's ensemble. "Or 5 bob a time." Dawlish was surprised. This was a good deal higher than he was used to, but he guessed he could hold his own anyway. He dealt the cards in bundles of 3 and 2. Play began. Now it very soon became obvious to Dawlish that this fellow with the horseshoe had handled cards before. He had that nifty method of shuffling and dealing which involves a flourishing and crackling of the cards. He licked his thumbs. The pasteboards flew from his nimble fingers like greased lightning. Dawlish paid out. 5, 10, 15, 35, 50. He lost £6. A dull flush tinted his high cheekbones. He fortified himself with a long pull from his pocket flask, clenched his teeth, and concentrated grimly. Long before the train had reached Chatham, that £6 had become 46. Dawlish was plunging madly to retrieve his losses. A ghastly fear contracted his heart. He had lost much, very much more than he could afford to lose. It was quarter day, and he had calls to meet which must be met out of this money that he was losing. At £70, Herbert Dawlish leant back and wiped the sweat from his forehead with a shaky hand. He was pale, and the corners of his mouth were out of his control. A very unpleasant sight indeed. "I'm afraid," he muttered, "that I can't go on. I've lost every penny." The nifty man stopped short in the midst of a tune he was whistling. "That a fact? Hard luck, mate. Good game, though, eh? Hammer and tongs." "Look here," said Dawlish abjectly. It's a queer thing to say, but could you let me have that money back? For a little while, I mean. I would repay you later, but just now I... The nifty man had been staring at Dawlish in blank surprise. Now he suddenly guffawed. "Well, that's rich," he observed. "I'll tell the missus that when I gets home. She'll cry her eyes out, that she will. No, matey, nah poo, I ain't the Salvation Army home." "Let me explain," begged Dawlish in agony. "You don't understand. It's like this." "Oh, shove a boot in it, old fella. You ought never to have come out without your nurse." "Hey, what the—" "Put up your hands," said Dawlish, staring wickedly from behind his automatic. "Right up." Even then, Dawlish had no notion of murder. He merely wanted to scare the fellow into parting with the money. He was frantic. He positively daren't go home and face his wife with a story of £70 lost. But firearms are dangerous things to play with. The nifty man's eyes narrowed. He made a sudden spring, and Dawlish, closing his eyes, pulled the trigger. Death is shockingly quick and sudden. In one brief second, Dawlish was saddled with a corpse. There was a grim blue hole in the middle of its forehead, and it had sagged slackly on the floor like a sack of something. Dawlish commanded himself with an effort and began to think out ways and means. He was about to bundle the body out of the carriage onto the permanent way when he caught sight of a wristwatch. An inspiration caused him to alter the time of this watch to 5:50. He counted on the watch stopping when the crash came, and a watch stopped at 5:50, unless the body were found immediately, would point to the fact of the man's having travelled down by an earlier train. This done, he opened the carriage door, looked cautiously ahead and behind, then, with the train doing about 40, shoved out the remains of the nifty man. Venner, the Scotland Yard man, was in the 8:40 to town on the following morning. He and two others greeted Dawlish with ribald cries as usual. These four had played cards on the up journey every day, barring holidays, for 10 years. "Come along, you old blighter, the cards," they cried. "Where were you loafing last night, by the way?" "Late," said Dawlish. "Had to run for it." "Seen the paper? The murder on the 5:10. Smith, who was sorting out Dawlish's cards, nodded. "Poor devil's all bashed about," he said. "Face practically gone, they say. Not that he'd feel it, I suppose. You heard anything about it, Venner, apart from what the papers give?" Venner smiled quietly. "I hear a good deal," he said, "that I'm not allowed to tell. As a matter of fact, I viewed the body about 2 or 3 hours after the murder. They rushed me up by car from Herne Bay." "I say," said Smith, "look here, old Dawlish, you've only got half a pack here. The ace of trouble's missing." Smith always called the ace of spades the ace of trouble, because spades stood for trouble in the fortune-teller's jargon. "I expect it's in my pocket," said Dawlish. But he was spared the trouble of searching by Venner. The man from the yard looked suddenly grave as he pulled out a card from his own pocket. "No," he said. "Here it is, unless I'm mistaken." He laid the ace of spades on the table, the ace which had been missing from that same pack. "Yes, that's it, by Jove," cried Smith. "Where the devil did you get it, you old card sharper?" Venner turned and looked at Dawlish. Then he laid a hand on his arm. "Dawlish," he said, "this hurts like blazes, but I've got to do it. You're arrested. That ace of spades was found up the sleeve of the murdered man." And that was The Ace of Trouble by C.Hedley Barker. I'm Kim Dodsworth.